Hello. Welcome to Book 2, Night 5 of the Orphan's Tales Live reading experience. And it will be an experience tonight because we are in the middle of a pretty serious thunderstorm out there. So if there are big rumbles, as there have been over the last 2 hours, don't be alarmed. I have not invested in a new and more exciting sound effect system. It is the outside doing its outside thing. So hi everybody, it's good to see people popping in. Welcome to the first Wednesday night reading. I realized without meaning to, I took up the church days. I don't know if who went to like the kinds of churches that would have church on days other than Sunday, but I grew up in that kind of church. And Sundays were services and Wednesdays were testimonials where you were meant to show up and talk about how our particular religion had saved you. And so when I was staying with my grandparents, church was Wednesday night as well as Sunday morning. So unintentionally, I have taken up the church days, so that should be interesting. These will be more interesting than testimonials about how you don't need to go to the doctor if you're sick. A hint, in case those of you who don't know what religion I was raised in. Yeah, so, I mean, same diff as Sunday, everything's falling apart, world's on fire, that's just how it goes these days. I wish the best to everyone. I hope that you're staying safe, keeping your mask on, silently judging everyone around you who isn't. I think that's pretty much all we can do. The Bordeaux is good. My partner went into town to get supplies and brought me back my favorite wine, which is Bordeaux. A couple different kinds, so I could pretend like the world is as it once was. So I have a nice healthy glass of, like, real proper glass, because I've broken almost every glass in the house over this quarantine. This is one of my 2 remaining wine glasses, but it is a real wine glass. The only other ones I have are like this big from a tasting we went to in, where were we? It was with Sarah, but I don't remember where, somewhere, oh yeah, in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Not your best wine country. But I have all that's all I have left, my wine glasses. I'm just babbling on. This is irrelevant to fairy tales or anything else, and probably not very interesting. Yeah, so the big debate today for those looking back in history is whether or not we're opening the schools in the fall. It has not been resolved as of today, and I think probably won't be. But it's not great. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But we are here to escape from all that. The lipstick tonight is Fallen Leaves from Morgana Cryptoria's Vegan Lipsticks. It's got a color shift as well, but it's probably still too dim for you to see a color shift, but it's got like it's a greenish color shift on it. Yeah, it's fun and yay. So yeah, let me do my intro stuff and we will get moving. I did some math, and if we do this 2 nights, we've been churning through about 20 pages a night. We'll be done in 10 weeks, just about time to hit October, which is not too bad, but that means we will have spent like the better part of 2020 reading these books together, and that's pretty cool. So thank you for joining me. Okay, so as usual, maybe I'll get my patter back with 2 nights a week. As usual, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. This is a play, a one-woman show, for legal reasons. You can get copies of these books at any of your local independent booksellers' web portals. If you would like to support my local independent bookseller, it is printbookstore.com. Please do buy them from local storefronts, though. Amazon will be fine when this is all over, and many of the others will not. You can get music based on these books at sjtucker.com. She has an album based on each of these novels, and they are amazing. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti, yelling at clouds. You can find me on Patreon at Cat Valenti as well. There's a new excerpt from my in progress, nearly finished middle grade fantasy novel, which is going to have a different title, but is right now called The Quidnuncs, up there right now. And you can ask me questions when the feed is over, when this stream is over, the reading. but dead air sucks. So if you think of questions while I'm reading, then you can pop them right up in the little box as soon as I'm finished, and we don't have to stare at each other awkwardly waiting for someone to ask something. And you can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live on YouTube. They do tend to go up the next day after the reading's over. And you, if you are so moved, can toss a coin to your witch. Put a coin in the witch's hat, which is a tip jar on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, or my website, which is catherinemvalenti.com. These are absolutely free readings. You don't have to, but freelance time during a pandemic turns out to be a really rough gig, and things are quite tight. So if you would like to give anything, it would be deeply, deeply appreciated. And I will thank you by name on the next stream if anybody does. All right, so let's get ready to rumble. Do I remember what's coming tonight? No, it's probably depressing. I feel like I have to apologize at the beginning of each of these now that we have gotten to the very darkest part of the book. It isn't going to get any darker, I don't think. I don't think it's going to get any darker than the mint. I'm pretty sure that's the worst of it. But tonight we're going to read about unicorns. Should be fun. We'll talk about it a little bit afterwards. This part of the book was always meant to be the scariest part, the most horror genre part. It represents the element of air and the season of autumn. It is the portion of the book that is the death and the loss and the scary. It is the Empire Strikes Back of the Orphan's Tale. So I am sorry that this is not quite as cheerful as I might hope if I were picking something at random to cheer you up with during the pandemic. Unfortunately, I picked this because I don't have the audio rights to it. So and the structure seemed perfect back in March. So again, I'm sorry. This is not going to be like a pretty prancing sparkly unicorn, but I think at this point you probably know that. So let's get started. I had a little girl ask me once very seriously at a Fairyland reading, when are you going to write a book about a unicorn? And I said, well, I had a unicorn in a book called The Orphan's Tales. And she said, but was it about the unicorn? And I said, well, no, it's just a little part of the book. And she said, well, that doesn't count. When are you going to write a book about a unicorn? So one of these days, I promised her that I would write a book about a unicorn, and I will. But this is the part that the little girl in Vermont said didn't count. A tale of harm. I am not innocent. Consider this. If a unicorn is innocent, if she is the core and pivot of all possible purity, why should she seek it out? Why should she care if some other creature is innocent, if she herself runneth over with virtue? Why should she, time and time again, though she knows better, she must know, be lured from the deep and shadowy greenwood by the simple presence of a girl in a white dress? Ridiculous. We want it because we have no idea what it is, except that we know its smell, its weight, its outline against a gray sky. We want it because it is new. We go toward it hoping that we can touch it, that we can understand it, that we may become innocent ourselves. You might chase down a cooling cake, but not if your belly is full. So it is. The science of innocence is complex and technical. I shall not worry your little ears with such talk. Suffice it to say, the hymen is irrelevant, as irrelevant to us as trousers. The word innocent means without harm. Did you know that? Your mother ought to have taught you what a dictionary was. There is some debate when unicorns gather as to what exactly the definition ought to be. One who has not been harmed, or one who has done no harm. The smell is different, of course, and everyone has their tastes. I have always held that those who do no harm are the most rarefied creatures, which is why we draw back in such horror when the huntsmen come. Suddenly, the little dove who opened its wings to us is a dove no longer, but a thing which has caused harm, great harm, which has brought arrows and knives and smells like burning crusts, scorched flour. It should be clear that whatever interpretation is supported by the majority of the herd, it is a thing we have no part of. We do not have this horn for hanging laundry upon, or water divining, or lock-picking. It is for gouging and puncturing. It is for ripping the flanks of deer and punching through the shells of turtles. It is perhaps for piercing even the skins of innocents. I will not say that the first unicorn to discover one ran her through immediately. The scent of her blood was so sweet and spiced that we have sought it ever since. I will not say it, but it may be true. We are carnivores. We are horses and more. We mate and maul and shatter trees with our hooves. We fight each other with the tangled horns. We race with such speed that the earth is torn to strips beneath us. We harm. We are not ashamed of it. It is our nature. But like all things, we are drawn to that which is our opposite. And we are harmed in our turn. Oh, doubt it not, child. And yet our horn is not a dead, mute knife. It is our secret self. When the wind blows, it plays the slivers of space between red horn and black like a flute of flesh. And the most terrible and radiant songs are heard, but only by us. It is for mating and for mothers with colts at their teats. I remember that my father knelt in a storm and let his horn sing to me dreaming once, when the forest was full. The voice of his horn was high and sad and bright as lightning, and I loved him. But he is gone now, and no storm can move me. They used a boy. In the green and bramble, his smell was sweet as plums and peppermint leaves. How do they find us? I suppose it is simple enough to track an animal, to find its drinking places, its sleeping places, its loving places. And by a pool clear as air, they sat down a boy in the softly blowing dandelion seeds, a boy with large, calm eyes, and the most hesitant beginning of a brown beard, told him to be very, very still, like a good boy, and he might see something to tell his children about. I did not want to go. The scent of it is horrible and wonderful. We all of us try to ignore it, to bend our heads into the roses and blot out the smell, to pretend that golden beehive up in the poplar is of much more interest. But eventually it wins out. The sweetness and the longing, the almost memory of a thing which we are not, could never be. Curiosity to touch such a foreign substance, like ambergris or the tails of crystal fish, to kneel in the lap of grace and be touched for only a moment by something which smells of violets and thick salted bread and wholeness. He held out his arms to me. It blew off of him like steam. I ground my teeth, but I went to him, foolish as a virgin, and knelt near him, knowing that next would be the bridle and the whip. But I could not help it. His innocence wrapped me up soft and golden, and if I could but lay my head in the lap of that purity, I would know what light was made of, and warmth and grace. He would not hurt me, the scent said. He was not even capable of it. He held out his arms to me, and slowly I sank into him. His hands went to my pelt, my mane. He gurgled a childish pleasure, and I opened my mouth to breathe him in. But the breath that came was not my own, for he sighed gently upon me as though blowing out a candle. The secret music rose up, and I started in his embrace, for it was the sorrow and blood song, the marrow and grief song. "What are you doing, child?" I cried. I wanted to hear the sound the wind makes out of you. He shrugged, his brown eyes warm and delighted. "But how did you know of it? It is ours, our own thing, not yours to play. My father and mother taught me everything about you, forelock to withers, so that when I found myself with your head in my hands, I would not hesitate. The Poisoner's Tale. My parents never worried for employment. They were poisoners, the best of their breed, and when they had a son, they called him Bryony, after the black herb that makes the palms itch until the owner claws them to gleaming ribbons. They resolved that I should be a prodigy among poisoners, and set out about my training as soon as I entered the world. My mother drank tiny slivers of mandrake, powdered finer than hummingbird wings, in her morning tea and passed it to me through her milk. She rubbed my lips with hellebore, just enough to taste, brackish and foul if you'd like to know, like river water after a storm. My father made fried eggs with translucent crescents of nightshade sizzling in oil, salads of oleander and monkshood, pies of yew berries and rosary peas. All these things they fed me, tiny portion by tiny portion, so that when I was grown, none of them could hurt me, any more than blueberries might hurt another boy. They delighted in finding new things to wean me with. Cherry bark that causes a plague of gasping until the breath is entirely gone. Foxglove that inspires riots of excited murmuring, nearly poetry before a convulsive death. Thorn apple, which grants extraordinary visions, and then a black blindness. Once my mother bade me hold a sprig of mistletoe and one of hemlock in each hand, and eat a needle of one and then the other, while she wrote down my descriptions of stomach seizures. There were more exotic venoms, the saliva of a rabid wolf, harpy milk, basilisk bile. But we always found the simplest poisons to be best. You cannot imagine what can be made from a buttercup. It was, in its way, a happy childhood. I was loved, I ate well, and pink gill is not at all an unsavory mushroom when used judiciously, and eaten by those whose bellies are staunch and steadfast as ours. We lived in a rickety, bare-roofed house on stilts near a long blue river, which was cold as a corpse's cup and prone to flooding. Poisoners are paid well, of course, but if one displays one's wealth, and one is often asked its source, and we thrived on a discreet business. The riverside was in a poor part of town, where folks slopped their garbage into the current and cursed the chickens in braying voices, and so we chose it, and my parents practiced their art on me with tender attention. Curiously, however, the layering of poison upon poison in my blood did not prove entirely benign. My skin grew stretched and thin like a snake's and quite as untrustworthy. When I was just a boy, my father was teaching me to mix bilewort, holly seeds, and elephant ear to make a draught that would plant the seeds in the subject's stomach, resulting in a very festive arrangement bursting from their mouths a few weeks after application. When we finished, he spread a bit of the stuff on my tongue like a sacrament, for my parents believed sincerely that death was a sacred covenant between poisoner and condemned, and, like all sacred things, had its due reverence. We give a person the world distilled, and thus deliver them from it. What more profound act can there be? I closed my eyes, prepared for profundity. The brew tasted dry and dusty, like flowers left too long in a white vase, but there was a sharp tang to it, an arrow of sourness that flashed bright across my throat. I looked at my father, surprised, and held out my hand. A little holly sprig sprouted there, its berries vermilion against my skin. It grew smoothly from my palm, the child of some combination of oil and seed or root and blossom I had sucked in over the years. We laughed, nervously, and trimmed the miniature bush down to the skin. Eventually it scabbed over, but from then on I was occasionally plagued with effusions such as these, twisting out of my flesh like new limbs. And so I became both source and practitioner. I was not allowed to actually sprinkle the food or mix the draught, no matter how I might long to experience the exchange of one world for another. My education was purely alchemical. If we let you loose the venom from your own hand, it might spook the unicorn, they said, grinning, knowing I did not understand. But I observed many poisonings while I was beardless and giggling, concealed behind door or hollow wall, beneath hanging tapestry or bed. Shall I tell you of my favorite? While we have the time. You must be curious. We're so alike, you and I. The doge of a far-off country, a place full of red rocks and red roofs and stoops dusty with sage and sap, was possessed of 2 daughters. The one devilish and heartless, the other sweet and good as milk. Such men are often afflicted these days. In the city of red rocks and red roofs, which was called Ambarabad, the first child of the Doge was called Hind, and she was the sort that liked to dance with men and eat iced cakes and read books with pictures she ought not to see. The second was Hadil, who liked only to please her father. As they grew alike in beauty and poise, the Doge frowned into his cups and weighed their differences. He was a complex man, and decided to teach them a lesson, though perhaps a switch to the back of one and a stiff drink to the other would have sufficed. But he was, as I have said, a complex man. Now Ambarabad was a prosperous, though small city, which sat like a fisherman with his legs dangling in a salty spit of sea. A tiny inlet fed the blue water into the center of the territory, and all along it grew weeping cedars, at which the young men would laugh, calling them the future wealth of Ambarabad. For the present wealth of Ambarabad was amber, which is so plentiful in those parts one may walk along the narrow, rust-colored beaches and pluck wet, glistening stones from the sand. Some of them even fish for it, with fine nets of nettle and flax, drawing red golden gems like salmon from the frothing water. The city smelled richly of resin and strangely of burning jewels, and cast its shadow in pale yellow streaks on the earth, for Ambarabad was a city in the sky, suspended between the trunks of the great seaside cedars. Long garlands of chicory, milkweed, and tightly budded roses wound around the delicate bridges that led from tree to tree, as in some cities streets will lead from ministry to cemetery, and in others canals will lead from market to haberdashery. The people of Ambarabad are exceptionally fleet of foot, and hardly any of them fall. The Doge's palace is rather predictably built out from the widest part of the trunk of the greatest of the cedars, and all of its rooms are enameled in amber, studded with carvings of blossoms, women, soldiers, horses at full gallop, and any number of heroic scenes. All the rooms are red and gold with this gleaming material, and with the soft furry planks of cedar which show through the occasional strategic gaps in the walls. In these rooms walked the sisters Hind and Hadil. Hadil wore long strings of amber beads lacing over her body in complex patterns, close at her throat, and looping wide over her wrists and waist, crisscrossing her modest, high-collared chest. Her eyes were bright and gold as sap, her hair as deep a red as the most costly resin. Hind, too, wore long strings of beads, but hers were cast from amber pitch, the strange black ruin left behind when amber is burned to make that costly oil which her sister so resembled. These black beads whirled around, loose at her throat and close at her wrists and waist, crossing her barely contained breasts. In these rooms, Hind tried to coax her sister to read the books she read, which had woodcuts no girl should see, and to eat cakes which would make her spidery figure ample, and to leave open the amber doors of their rooms so that men from the other cedars might swing across the milkweed garlands and sing to them through the hinges. In these rooms, Hadil tried to rein her sister close and close up the hinged doors when the night streamed darkly in, and crumble the cakes onto the sill for passing birds, showing her sister instead plain brown breads and raw roots. She tried to train her sister's wanton eyes to prayer books, which had no woodcuts at all, but only psalms and hymns, which Hadil would sing on the balconies of her high house until her voice became known as the bell of Ambarabad. In these rooms, neither sister yielded to the other, and they sat sullenly upon their red couches, the one chewing her roots, the other her cakes. "Why will you not play with me as a sister should?" Hind would cry. "Why will you not pray with me as a sister should?" Hadil would whisper. And so their father called upon us, and we traveled in our little caravan to his city, which, my father said, was over-fat, nearing the time for a fasting, as he usually said of the opulent cities where our arts were most appreciated. He was something of an ascetic, my father, tall and thin and imperious, his sparse hair gone slightly green from the same little draughts of poison to which I was happily accustomed. The Doge was unspecific in his letters as to the shape of the lesson, only as to its intended content. Thus we pored and pondered until we had devised what we thought an acceptable tutorial. It was a very complicated boil. Shattered oyster shell and quartered toad, lily of the valley and autumn crocus cut carefully from the insides of my cheeks, jack in the pulpit and poached rhubarb leaves, smoked and reduced and thickened with cane for weeks. At the last, pearls were dissolved into the brazier, and toad eyes pierced and allowed to dribble into the mire. We baked them into sweet candies, the light flavor of anise and dusky peppers. We presented them to the girls at a banquet, posing as cooks. I watched from behind my mother's voluminous chef skirts, a little kitchen waif gawking at the finery. They sucked them down happily, Hind greedily chewing and Hadil making small kissing gestures with her pink lips as the anise puckered her cheeks. It was some time before the effect would be seen, and we were invited to stay and enjoy the food we had pretended to prepare. I was sitting between my parents with an antler fork in one hand, poised to mouth a sliver of sheep's fat, when Hind turned to her father and said, "When you are dead, and I am Doge, I shall invite all the woodcutters and poets to this place, and they will write odes to the beauty of Amberabad and her 2 daughters." Hadil blushed. "When you have gone, and I am Doge, in your place I shall cover my face in mourning white, and no images shall be made of anything at all for a full year, so that we may remember only your kindness and your face." Hind looked at Hadil with disgust. "When did you lie down under the surgeon's knife and let your heart be cut away? Can you not even once smile with me and be my sister? Stuff your pinched face with your damn bitter roots and choke on them. May you—" But she did not finish her curses. Out of her mouth came a single pearl, large and white and shimmering. Hadil cried out in surprise, and from her rose-scented lips came a slim green frog, hopping unconcernedly onto the table. Another followed, and another pearl from her sister, and another frog. The table leapt with green and clattered with white, the Doge's beautiful daughters holding back their curled and perfumed hair with both hands as they vomited up jewels and amphibians. The Doge scowled. "I told you to teach them. Teach the one that goodness is not enough, and the other that cold cruelty is too much. What is this? Precious jewels from the corrupt daughter, slimy creatures from the virtuous. You will get no payment from me." My mother, always the orator, bowed low. "Your Grace, forgive me, but we do not see as you see. From the mouth of the child you judged wicked comes nothing but cold stones, lifeless, shellfish waste. In a seaside kingdom such as yours, they are too common to be called valuable. Beautiful, yes, and they have their worth, but they are just pretty rocks. Out of the other comes frogs, which you may consider ugly, but are food and clothing and curatives and poisons. They are eminently useful creatures in any clime, and she will never be hungry, nor anyone who comes near. Yet those who come near will, often as not, cry out in disgust and speak not to her sweetness. Tell me I have not taught a lesson they will remember." The Doge laughed, and so did I. Hind hiccuped, and a pearl formed at the corner of her mouth. She stifled tears as one of her sister's frogs caught the jewel in his tongue and swallowed it. "I have heard that, swollen with pride in her frogs, Hadil became an inefficient Doge, caring only for her amphibian subjects, ordering every frog to be escorted across the road and hoisted on silk cushions, lest the poor beasts suffer. She kept up her singing until no one could stand to step out of their homes. She added songs for her father's shade, and songs for the betterment of frogs, and songs for the salvation of her lost sister. Finally, there was no hour left in the day when the bell of Amberabad did not endlessly drone from its high balcony. Hind, I have heard it said, went into the world, dropping pearls behind her and thinking no more on politics. Perhaps we had too great a love of preaching, but we were clever and delighted each other and practiced our arts with a precision nearly unknown in these degenerate times. And I will take their place when they have gone. I will be greater even than they, for I need no wild wood to give up its savages to me. I am the wild wood, and to produce both pearls and frogs from maidens I need but to extend my hand." Here we have a froggy sitting on the pearls. The tale of harm continued. Bryony put his hand near my nose, palm up, and from it twisted up a thorny rose, cloying in its scent, which interfered with his own. "You understand why I could not give the girls their candies. I did not then. But when I was older, my mother and father showed me their books, and I read about you, about the unicorn, about the song the wind plays on your horn. They told me that at my graduation from their little academy, I would come when I had caught you, and made my poisoner's cup, for no poisoner can afford to be felled by his own leafy thralls, and it is known that your horn makes all poison as harmless as water. There's a unicorn in this part of the world, and her name is Nevenost, and we have saved you for her, they said. Go and become a man. This is why I have knelt by you and held your head and let you smell me all you like, the last wafting fragrances of my innocence. For I am eager to do harm in the name of the world distilled, eager to join my parents again in their stilled house. I should have expected it. Yes, you should have. I hope I have been a soft bed for you, Nevenost. I hope the scent of my skin is all you hoped for. With this he drew a long silver chain from beneath him and wrapped it round my neck. I recoiled. His smell had changed, slanted into acrid and burning charcoal and soot and rinds of sour lemon roasted on white embers. He smiled and the stench worsened. My nose clogged with clanging, warring drifts of him, smoke and ashen logs, vinegar and limestone, and his stinking, cloying rose. As I struggled, they came, and surely you have heard this part of the story before, how the huntsmen came, with their green hose and their brown arrows, and held me to the earth while Bryony sawed my horn from my head with a blacksmith's blade. The wind made a sound like shrieking when the red whorls snapped and shattered. I bled, and the black whorls bled, and the ground was wet and slippery. I scrabbled against them, but the mud held me fast. Our horn is flesh no less than your nose, and the blood spurted from me like a string of black pearls onto the velvet lap of a poisoner's son. The Huldras tale continued. The unicorn glared at me, defying me to tell her how foolish she had been to go near him, or that she was no kind of beast to have lost her horn. Perhaps a grown woman would have said this, but I could not. Nevenost, I am sorry for what he has done. A boy once took a thing from me, and in its place I was given a golden ball, and now you see what has become of me. I am like you. Her gaze softened. I am not a unicorn if I have not my horn. I'm only a mule with a beard and a very odd tail. You are still a girl, though I am sorry for you. A golden ball is no thing to give a child. Please help me. I can help you if you will release me. I will not call a huntsman. I will not call the awful hedgehog who bound me here. If I am innocent, you are safe. All things are innocent until they are not, she snorted, but bent her dark leg and pawed at the quills which bristled from my pinioned hair in untold numbers. She dug at the soft soil, bit at the slick metallic quills, but her teeth could not catch on their surfaces, and they were driven too many and too deep for her to reach. Finally, she just stood before me, her brown flank glistening with sweat. The night sky was beginning to lighten in the east, a long, jagged strip of cold blue against the cold black, and I knew Syriaco would be coming soon. My hair, I whispered. Chew it off, and I will be loosed. If I am innocent, all parts of me are innocent, and you may taste of it. In my hair, in my curls, a thing which your treacherous boy would never give. Take my innocence and set me free. Nevenost hesitated, sidling to me in a way just as she had done when she first approached, neighing softly and reaching out her long, bloodied head to me, then drawing it back. Finally, she began to graze at the black strands, just like grass, and in the dew-frozen morning she severed my hair at its roots, murmuring as she did, in pleasure or pain, I could not tell. But she was somewhat overzealous, and she chewed my hair right to my scalp in her hunger and eagerness. I did not mind. Long after I could move again, I let her keep at her meal, leaning forward when she could not reach me. You taste like the moon, so cold and pure, she whispered in my ear, and began to kick at the sawed bricks, by now turned to iron plates by the frost. I tumbled out of the house that my golden ball built, for I still and always thought of him as mine, my ball, at Nevenost's feet. You said you could help me, she said, still in a half-swoon. I turned and clawed in the hard soil around those unnumbered quills, gold and silver and copper and iron and quartz and diamond and emerald and sapphire. I dug deep, and as I dug, I wept and grunted and cried out, all those months walled into the sod tower, rushing from me like frogs from a good girl's mouth. My fingers were hooked and grimed, but finally I held out to her a bouquet of dirt-clung bristles in every metal imaginable. It is enough, I sobbed, for a new horn. Nevernost bent her head and nuzzled me very lightly. My horn is a coloured cup on a table far off from here. I cannot take another while it still lives. What would it say? But should it break in lands I will never see, perhaps I shall know what wholeness is. Very slowly she sank to the ground and lowered her ruined head onto my lap. Blood had begun to ooze again, just a few drops from the scabs on her severed horn. She closed her eyes and breathed very deeply through her soft nose. I lay beneath her, feeling her weight heavy as guilt. The tale of the 12 coins continued. Oubliette rubbed her shorn head absently. She took my innocence, what there was, into her, and then not only was I wicked and ugly and at the mercy of anyone who decided he loved me, but I was a grown woman too, and bald as a vulture. I had hardly stumbled out of the field where Cyriaco had built his house of sod and child when the city blew in and the Praeta seized me up, knowing as my ball did that no one would come looking for me. I don't think they know. They just gather whatever the wind scours up. They know. I could say nothing. Instead, I slipped out of bed and hopped quickly around to the other side, the floor icy beneath my soles. I climbed in again behind her. Gingerly and gently, I put my arms around her. I was a man. I ought to know how to do this. Pressed my skinny body against her bark back, holding her and rocking her like my own child. You are not ugly or wicked or at anyone's mercy, I whispered, though you are bald. She laughed a little, but as she warmed beside me, I felt her crying, quiet as pages rustling. We worked at the mint for 7 years. She kept her hair short, cutting it with the side of a sharpened gear. It was short and ragged, but thick, dark over her head. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said, "My hair is hers now." I cannot begin to tell how often the wind carried us, or to what crevices of the world. Sometimes it seemed that beyond the tattered borders of the city it snowed. Other times I seemed to smell a sage and stone desert. There was never a lack of materials for the mint. Mostly we did not have time to look at those borders or anything outside the walls of that place. We worked, we ate, opals and garnets and pearls and chalcedony and hematite and lapis lazuli and malachite dark and green. Fumine was right. A topaz tastes like a peach. Once, when the quota for the day had been exceeded, we were given diamonds, and they tasted like frozen lemons. Occasionally, we slept. They watched us whenever we ate, stroking their long necks in time to our chewing. The dead city traded and bustled, but ate nothing, drank nothing. They watched us like a play and salivated. Some of us grew up. Many did not. Like any machine, the mint was fickle and thirsty. Fingers were crushed and arms were torn from sockets. Not infrequently, an entire child fell or was pushed or jumped. Oh, so many jumped into the gears and stamps. The first time it happened, I cried out, and my cry in that huge silent hall was like a knife through the air. Everyone stopped, turned to stare. But they stared at me, not the child who had swooned into the coin stamp and left a bloody stain on the boards. I had cried out. I had called attention to myself. They hissed at me to be quiet, and the mint ground on. By the time I was 14, only Oubliette was older than I. And by then, we thought we were strong enough and clever enough to escape. Gems are not nutritious, but the mint gave us a dim and sallow strength, turning and twisting as we had to, shoving the stamps down, as she did, or shoveling dead children onto the boards as I did. We did the same work for 7 years. And we shared a bed, not as lovers, you understand. I think I would have married her eventually, except that marrying her would have been like plowing a river with a perch-drawn plate. I wouldn't know how to begin or what the point would be. When I looked at her body, I did not see breasts or hips or even a tail or rough gray bark. I saw money. I saw coins piled up in a basket. I saw the money her bones could make. This is not the stuff of husbands. Some things you cannot put behind you and forget, as though a golden curtain had closed on them. We shared our bed for warmth and company, and if we had not, I think one of us would have gone headlong into the gears long before. I scratched her bark and burls, She rubbed my neck. We helped each other return to ourselves when the work was done. After a while, we stopped sneaking about and just filed into a common bed at shift's end. The Praita said nothing. There was always a new child for an empty bed. On that night of all nights, as I cradled my tree girl in my arms, she spoke, quieter than a single drop of water dripping from a roof. I am going into the machine tomorrow. I started, turned her to face me, her dark eyes wide and calm. What? Why? Why would you leave me here? Hush, I'm not leaving you. I found us a way out. I'm going to crush my arm in the stamps tomorrow, after the shift bell. I will creep back onto the floor and put my arm on the boards. I will let the great glossy stamp sever it. I will make with it the deheba we need to buy our way out. An arm is not so much. I have another. I will need your help to run the rest of the mint, the scrapers and scrubbers and cutters and board runners. I think if we are quick, we can do it. An arm's worth of coin is not enough to tempt anyone in this place. They have hundreds of arms at the end of any reach. It will tempt Funim. She likes us. She watches over us. It will be enough. I was silent for a long while, and the other children, young and new, snuffled in their gray beds. It is a good plan, Oubliette, but not for you. I will put my arm beneath the stamp. I will let it cut into my shoulder, and you will remain whole. Her thick eyebrows furrowed, and she scowled at me. Why? You know you're an overgrown, scruffy-limbed infant when it comes to pain. I held her face in my hand, cold skin on cold skin, her clipped hair bristling against the tips of my fingers like quills. My arm is bigger. We will get more money. She said nothing. What could she say to that? You will cry out. I will not. We held each other all that night, and she kissed the only kiss she ever gave me, the spot where my shoulder joined my arm. In the garden. The boy had left her. He always left her. Each morning and the morning after that one. She did not mind, really. It was difficult to speak for so long, to remember so much of what was written on her eyelids, to be close to another child when she had been alone for so long. She had not known how that could tire her. So it was that when he had gone from her, she often went to the great placid garden lake to let the cool water, rippling like a dress pulled up above the knees, wash him away from her. The hard, round pebbles under her bare feet were comforting. She'd always had them, and the lake and the reeds and the knocking cattails and the moon and the stars, to stroke her to sleep. She thought of the boy, how eagerly she waited for him whenever the red sun sank below the pomegranate trees, yet how often she was emptied when he was gone, like a painted vase whose water has been flung out onto the flagstones. It was so easy to miss someone, she thought, when you've never missed anyone before. She knew her stories so well. She did not lose them when she spooled them out to him. She told herself this over and over. They were still her own, her very own. But when the words of the tales passed her lips and wound into his ears, they seemed to become so solid, to grow limbs and hearts, bodies winding into each other like snails winding into their shells. When she'd been alone and whispered those tales into nothing more than the surface of a little pond or a thatch of blackberries, they had stayed thin and wispy, shreds of a gown which did not quite fit her fluttering in the wind. She was happy to see them grow solid, and she told herself this over and over, too. Waist deep in the lake, she turned her face up to the starlight and the falling shadows of the dwindling ash trees. The leaves were all gray in the dark, their reds and golds seeped out like tails. She ducked her head under the water once, twice. She'd long ago stopped praying that the black marks would come off when she did so. She would be looking for him again by the next evening, she knew. But now she felt as though all herself were laid open like shining tendrils, like snakes let out of their basket to wriggle in the world. She gathered them again in the silver light. When she came up for breath and cleared the lake from her eyes, a figure was walking nearby, cloaked in white, and not her boy at all, some distance from the violet-bordered water. It was Dinarzade. Her hair flowed behind her like the shadow of a much taller woman, and her feet were bare on the grass. The girl feared Dinarzade had gone mad. Proper amiras did not go about thus. The But she seemed calm and did not weep or tear her hair, but touched the trees lightly as she passed, as though looking for something. Finally, she saw the girl in the water, half submerged like a lamia or a mermaid, and froze near an orange tree which was still glossy and green in the forest of bare branches. The girl said nothing. When one approached a strange animal for the first time, she knew sudden movements would frighten it or enrage it, and if she did not want a terrified goose on her hands, surely she did not want a terrified princess. Dinarzade opened her dark mouth and squeaked. She tried again, her voice clearing like a winter sky. I wanted to hear. I wanted to listen. She bolted, a doe caught before an arrow. The girl watched her go, not knowing what she could do to make the woman stay. She had never tried to make the boy stay once the tales had begun. He was naturally faithful as a sleek hound. And so it was not surprising when he found her near the moss-drenched stones the next night. It was only as much as she had come to expect from him, expect and anticipate, though it did cost her. He brought her a round cheese and a slice of pastry. They whispered and ate as they had always done until the sky had gone black as it might, and she could begin again in secret and in safety. I want to hear more, the boy said excitedly, clapping his hands. Dinarzade didn't speak to me all day. It was like a holiday. Tell me how they escaped. The girl smiled softly and breathed deeply, opening up her tales again, herself like a reliquary full of sacred bones. 7 was certain he would not cry out when the stamp pressed down on his shoulder. He would be brave and stalwart, stoic and true. And we will pick up next week with the tale of the 12 coins continued. And we have hit page 100. Yay. Of it's almost 500 pages in this beast. So yeah. Boy, there's a lot going on there. Does anyone have any questions? I do remember that the frogs and the pearls thing is a real fairy tale, and I always thought they had it backwards, which was the better one and the better sister. So there's a lot of reversals in that story. Never noticed is innocence in Russian. The whole thing with Seven and Oubliette and how traumatic it is, it does come back to something that I talk about a lot with regards to fairy tales and when I retell fairy tales. And that's Hansel and Gretel. There's no way that Hansel and Gretel grow up to be normal people. Like, in any way, anybody's wife or husband, anybody's like father or mother, and they're just normal and things are fine. What happened to them is so incredibly traumatic when you actually think about it. You know, they're trapped by a cannibal witch and Gretel had to murder her as a small child. Like, this is not something you grow past. And what happens in fairy tales is often trauma that nobody could genuinely grow past. And I'm always interested in sort of the psychological realism of how you function in life when the fairy tale is over, and that has happened to you and it can never unhappen to you. So that's a big part of what's sort of the engine in Seven Oubliette's story. Mandy asks, you mentioned earlier that you hadn't intended this to be used as a comfort read. Is there anything that I read, watch, or listen as a comforting talisman? You are not the first person to ask me that recently. And I used to reread stuff all the time when I was younger, and I just don't anymore because I can barely get enough time to read things for the first time during the day. But The Hobbit is a very comforting read. Listening to Hitchhiker's Guide, and I don't know, like I guess the thing that's most comforting to me is finding a new book that I can kind of disappear into, because most of my comfort reads at this point and at this age, my old age, I know them so well that my brain can't completely vanish into them the way it really does into a good book, that wonderful feeling where there's nothing but you and getting to the end of the book. My brain can't really do that with things I've read so many times. So the comfort has to come from finding something new. I'm always thinking about the next thing I know is coming, or my own book, or the cultural analysis of The Hobbit or whatever. So I'm truly comforted by finding a new good book to read. Have I ever encountered Garth Nix's version of it as one of his early works? I haven't. I will look into that. I've retold Hansel and Gretel a number of times myself. The the Candy House. It's aces. It's good stuff. But it is definitely, not all fairy tales actually have murder in them. And just straight up pushing someone into an oven. It's just awful. And because it's a brother and a sister, and they presumably go back to real life together, it's always something that's really struck me as one of the more traumatic ones, and one of the more sort of realistic ones. Like, other than the Candy House, and you could legitimately build a house out of candy, the witch is just kind of a serial killer. Like, there's nothing particularly magical in Hansel and Gretel. The breadcrumbs are breadcrumbs. That's how breadcrumbs work. She pushes her into an oven because the cannibal witch is going to eat her. Like, there's actually no real speculative element to it other than the candy. So it's really a very chilling story. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll do my outro stuff, and then you guys can ask any questions while I'm talking, if you like, and I'll answer them afterwards. Okay, so this has not been an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. For legal reasons, this has been a play. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live on YouTube. This will go up sometime tomorrow. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti, and subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valenti. You can get copies of this book at your local independent bookseller, or mine, which is printbookstore.com. You can get music based on these books at sjtucker.com. And you can find us every Wednesday and Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, as well as I don't know why I said as well as nothing else. I'm very tired. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. If you are so moved to toss a coin to your witch, there is a tip jar on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, and on my website at catherineMvalenti.com. You don't have to, but everything is on fire, and finances are very tight during a pandemic for someone who works as a freelancer, as I do. So anything you can give would be deeply appreciated, and I will thank you by name on the next stream. If you want me to. If you tell me you don't want me to, I won't. I'll be like the poison. It reminded me of a short story I wrote called The Lily and the Horn, much later, which is my lesbian poisoner war story. And a story I thought was actually one of my weaker short stories, and people have really loved it, and it clearly nobody else thinks that, because people still ask me about it, and it came out years ago. Always looking forward to T. Kingfisher's new books, as one of the comments points out. I do like the poisoning thing, and the funny thing is that poisoning section connects to palimpsest, because I wrote the short story that turned into the novel of palimpsest for an anthology called Paper Cities. And the editor of that anthology, because it was a very shoestring operation, we all got paid $20 and a gift, and she sent me a dictionary of poisonous plants, in part because of that story. So that one connects up to sort of the next one in the line, which goes to Fairyland and everything else. So they're all connected one way or another. Thank you all so much for joining me. It was lovely to spend this evening with you, and I will see you on Sunday night, same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel.